Purposes of amendment. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I thank particularly Chairman Pierce and Ranking Member Perlmutter for their leadership in our Terrorism and Illicit Finance Subcommittee in giving us an opportunity to look at all things connected to better enforcement of our Anti-Money Laundering and Bank Secrecy Act provisions and how law enforcement cooperates with our financial institutions across the country to meet that objective. And let me thank my co-author of this measure, Dr. Foster of Illinois, for his incredible help in bringing this bill to the committee's consideration today. It's a very straightforward measure to enhance, as I say, law enforcement cooperation with our financial institutions. The bill allows a safe harbor from a regulatory compliance exam issue if a law enforcement agency has requested that a bank keep an account open for law enforcement monitoring purposes. That's the mission behind this bill. You can see the conflict. An FBI agent walks in your financial institution, or a U.S. attorney writes you a letter and says, "We're monitoring the activities of customer X, and we want you to keep the account open so that we can monitor that activity, see the connectivity of that illicit business." But 6 months goes by, and then you have a compliance examination by a regulatory body in your financial institution who notes that you filed a SAR, a suspicious activity report, on this account, and that this account is potentially engaged in illegal activity. And so they say, "We're going to write you up in your compliance exam for failure to close that account. You're not following the AML-BSA procedures of your bank." So this bill is very specific. It grants a waiver from that kind of compliance liability if a law enforcement agency has asked the bank to keep it open. And this gives proof to that effort. And so this bill codifies something that I think will provide clarity, reduce costs, and reduce complexity for our financial institutions, and actually enhance law enforcement's ability to operate. For example, when the Department of Justice writes a bank through the FBI, they say something like this: "I understand your institution is under no obligation to maintain these accounts. However, complying with this request will further law enforcement efforts." So this gives the bank certainty from a compliance point of view and give law enforcement more opportunity to achieve their objectives of catching a bad actor. Now, Dr. Foster and I have collaborated on this, and the amendment before you in a nature of a substitute adds some important provisions that my colleague from Illinois has focused on. One, let's move beyond just federal or state law enforcement to include tribal law enforcement or local law enforcement. Secondly, let's make sure that our regulatory agencies have the opportunity to validate that the bank's records, that they did have a letter from the FBI, are valid, and that letter documentation is appropriate. And that finally, that the compliance safe harbor only is during the period in which the request from law enforcement is active. So that time period is covered in writing, and that the safe harbor is tied to that time period. And I thank the gentleman from Illinois for collaborating on this issue. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield to the chairman on the balance of my opening time.
Well, I thank the